This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Haaland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Haaland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
Taxes was taxing. Now taxes is relaxing when you file for free.
I can file for free? TurboTax Free Edition. Roughly 37% of filers qualify. Simple Form 1040 returns only. See if you qualify at turbotax.com/free. I can file for free.
Now this is taxes. File for free with TurboTax Free Edition and get your maximum refund. No schedules except for Earned Income Tax Credit, Child Tax Credit, and Student Loan Interest. See if you qualify at turbotax.com/free.
It took a lifetime to find the person you want to marry. Finding the perfect engagement ring is a lot easier. At BlueNile.com, you can find or design the ring you've always dreamed of with help from Blue Nile's jewelry experts who are on hand 24/7 to answer questions, and the ease and convenience of shopping online. For a limited time, get $50 off your purchase of $500 or more with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com. That's $50 off with code LISTEN at BlueNile.com.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello everyone, hope you're all well. I'm just about recovered from a brilliant day out at FPL Meets last Saturday. Shame about the actual football, but there were loads of lovely folk from the rider community. Far too many to name, but I had a great time. And Sam, I went home at a decent hour, not off my face, and got a good night's sleep. So probably about right for a man of my age. In contrast, lots of other people, not naming names, James FPL, ended up out until 5 a.m. Shudder. I wake up at 5 a.m. sometimes these days. I cannot imagine being out till then anymore, which I suppose dates the pod because many, many years ago, I'm sure I would have been out until that, though. Anyway, we're here this week with our blank preview and my second pod already this week, having guests on Roberto, aka FPL Yellow Army's pod. The form is temporary last night, which is great. I think that's out later in the week, actually. I know you've been on there too, Sam. A nice bunch of guys there. We mentioned last time that we'd have the Dark Lord of Analytics FPL or FPL Analytic, I don't know which way around it is, Sai, on this one. But we've opted to keep our powder dry and have more next week for a deep dive into analytics in the season's FPL, just because we've got a bit of a gap. And I think it was worth kind of having a full pod on that rather than just a bit of discussion during this one. So really excited about that. We'll do that next week. As always, I'm joined by Sam. You all right, mate? How are you?
Yeah, I suppose. Just another frustrating week of FPL. Game week 28 ended up being one of those yet again, which we'll get into. But outside of FPL, all good. So that's the more important thing, I suppose. And I actually weirdly celebrated my 5-year anniversary today. To my surprise, I didn't realize it was of being an FPL Twitter nerd.
I thought that was going to be your.
Much more important than any. No, much more important than any relationship anniversary.
I'm surprised you're on the pod if that actually happened.
No, don't worry, I'm not going to miss that. But yeah, no, I woke up to that Twitter reminder, like, oh, you've been active for 5 years. I was like, okay, 5 years ago, it all changed. It all started going downhill. But no, in all seriousness, it's been great being a part of the community for 5 years. And I owe it all, or a lot of it, to who got the assist as well. So yeah, really delighted to be back on. And in the wider, grander scheme of things, we're still enjoying FPL. So that's what's more important. In the meantime, though, we've got a show to do. We are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we'll quickly run through team updates. The less said about that, the better. A salute to Mo Salah, the undisputed, probably at this point, king of FPL. He's broken his own FPL record. So we're going to have 5 minutes just having a little bit of a natter about just how special he is before moving on to the blank game week ahead and the preview. Unsurprisingly, we'll have a slight tweak to how we'll do it this week. We'll present some free hit teams we've both put together. It won't be appropriate for everyone, but that will be used as more of a springboard, I suppose, to talk about the key picks this week. And of course, some of the most highly owned, as well as some of the differential opportunities that we might be able to get involved in. Bold Claims comes back for another week. Best captains, Haaland versus Wood, perhaps, possibly Bruno in there as well. And then how we're planning to go with one transfer already used actually between one of us going into game week 29, but we're both looking at doing it without a free hit. So we're discussing our transfer plans later on. It's Tuesday the 11th of March, even Champions League and other European fixtures this week. Liverpool's going on in the background right now, but the Premier League games are done. So we can talk about our game week scores, can't we, Tom?
Yes, we can indeed. Although, it was the build us the forgotten game week. I mean, last week we said, oh, maybe it's not so forgotten after all. We've got decisions to make. But I suspect it actually will paradoxically end up being a weekend to be forgotten, won't it? It really wasn't very good. And I think it's now back-to-back weeks of milling around the 50-point mark. And after a bit of upward momentum up to a couple of weeks ago, it does feel like things have hit a bit of a plateau again, haven't they?
Well, yeah, they certainly have for me. So 49 points this week was really quite turgid, considering 30 of them came from Mo Salah. That's about the only thing that went well for me this week was the captaincy choice. But considering he was about not 195% effective ownership, I'm not really sure I can take that as a win. Clivert was the only other returner for me with a measly assist. So 5 points from him. 2s, 1s and 0s all round the board outside of that. So 9 blanks. João Pedro on my bench against what was billed as a very solid Fulham defence, third best statistically in the league. But of course, he goes and scores a 90-something minute winner penalty goal after being taken off early in recent weeks. So that was a little bit frustrating. And I'm back down to outside 400k, which is extremely worrying and annoying considering the progress I'd made. And it feels like the season's slipping away from me a little bit, but I'm trying not to get too downbeat about it. We've still got 10 game weeks to go. Can you lift me up at all, Tom? Is there any hope to be taken from this?
God, it really was one of those weeks, wasn't it? I mean, I think the only kind of positive is the slippage has been quite far, but to be fair, this week was a weird one, and last week was a weird one as well, just because it was death by 1,000 cuts again. Like we both said on the Sunday, didn't we? That like none of the rank threats other than Munoz was above 30%, but the top 5, 6 all returned. Whereas what were we looking at? Just a pile of appearance points. So even though it does look like kind of in terms of the overall numbers in terms of rank drop, like quite a long drop, I think in terms of the actual points, it's not that bad just because those threats were like really diminished by the fact that the ownership was so low. It was just the fact that you didn't have anything and I didn't have anything indeed to compete against that. And that's what really sucked this week. And obviously having João Pedro on your bench, like you had absolutely no reason to contemplate playing him with the team that you had. So it's just one of those, I know you're not bothered by bench points anyway, and it's one of those things that just you take on the chin and move on. I had a very similar week to you, just pretty much all appearance. Like if live FPL says that your star player is David Raya with 3 points, you know what kind of week you've had. Put it that way. Dreadful 52 points. Down from just outside of top at 200k to kind of 280k ish now. There's a last minute sort of hoo-ha with Marmouche. I think it was kind of 2 or 3 minutes. You texted me, didn't you, just before deadline, that Marmouche wasn't playing according to some kind of sources on X. So I kind of my toddler was trying to get my phone out of my hand the whole time, so I literally didn't have much time at all. I just kind of threw Dango on, and that was it. That's all I could possibly get. That's all I could possibly do. And I thought afterwards, I should have put Kirkes on. And I kind of was really hoping that Spurs would score at least one and two. I mean, just to make it kind of a little bit better, just because obviously that would have been nice to have the extra kind of 3 or 4 points from him this week, as opposed to Dango's one. But hey ho, it wasn't the 14 pointer that he was kind of projected to be on at one point. I think it was on 2 bonus at half time and was looking pretty good value. So yeah, bit of a rubbish week, down to 280k. But yeah, here we are. Just basically being saved again by Mohamed Salah, the Egyptian GOAT. I mean, there's not loads to say about Mo Salah that hasn't already been said in some way, shape, or form on this podcast throughout the years. Be it Nick, be it Lucy, be it Anthony, be it even Harry. Everyone has said what an amazing gift Mo Salah has been to us as fancy Premier League players. I remember him coming in at 9.0, all the naysaying. Brandon from Always Cheating was mentioned that he'd said initially that he'd be one of those players that was going to be forgotten, when he joined Liverpool. And I remember actually listening to that very pod. That was kind of in the summer when me and Nick actually first started. And he came in at 9 million, and little did we know exactly what happened. We both started the season with him, I believe, for Salah. And it was just one of those kind of moments that, really. Yeah, he's just been with us the entire time, basically, WGTA. He's been kind of the guy in FPL. So I think, he contributes to me having a bit of a soft spot for Liverpool just from a fantasy football perspective. And he contributes to, so many of my FPL points, albeit, it's not been as successful as I'd liked it to have been over the last few years. But yeah, absolute legend, absolute machine, absolute monster. And I don't know, Sam, there's not too much to say really about Salah except kind of AWE his impact on the Premier League and principally at FPL after shattering that points total this week.
Yeah, I think you've summarised it very nicely there. He's been up there as one of the best FPL assets over the last decade for quite a while now, to be honest. And he's just locked it in this season more than ever. With Haaland joining the game a couple of seasons ago, I think there was a bit of worry, or I suppose speculation, that Salah might be dethroned at some point. But I think given that Haaland's obviously playing in a slightly different position as a striker, 1 less point for the goal, no clean sheet, it was always difficult for him to maintain that sort of scoring streak that could help him compete with Salah. Salah's got so much about his game from an FPL point of view that really it only really takes one return for him per week to get into the upper echelons past 200 points. And more so this season than ever before, he's actually been a bonus point monster. The way that the bonus point system has changed as well has benefited him more than ever this season. I think he's already far beyond any bonus point totals he's ever gotten before. And all of that combined means that he's probably going to notch up a total that is going to be pretty tough to ever be. It looks like 400s on the cards if rotation doesn't strike, if the league's all sewn up. We'll see about that. But either way, it's record breaking and it will be by quite some margin. And the only player that looks like he could be capable of breaking it at the moment in the future would be Haaland.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, I doubt he ever like gets so many goals that it makes up for the assists, the bonus points, the clean sheet points that Salah's able to collect alongside his goal tally. So I think Salah's going to be the undisputed GOAT of FPL for years and years to come yet, and I can't really see that changing.
Yeah, and if like the scoring system changed, then I think that might be kind of the way in which you'd see someone supplant Salah. But yeah, it has been a one-off, a phenomenon, and it's been incredible. You're completely right that this year especially, his bonus uptake has been absolutely huge. Like, remember back in the old days, we used to say he was kind of a allergic to bonus almost because he kept missing lots of chances. First season, I believe that he missed like kind of something ridiculous. I think it was about 15 plus big chances missed as well. So you definitely saw him kind of not he could go through a game and get what was it? It's 7 points, 8 points, or something like that, and then you'd be like, "Where's my bonus?" Because Salah scored, and he scored in the 2-0, and there'll be nothing else. And he's really kind of added that creativity to his game, and his all-round sort of brilliance is just plain for all to see. And as you said, yeah, I think it's going to be really, really difficult to see anyone ever supplanting him right now. You never know. There'll be a regen that comes along in the future, who I'm sure is going to absolutely tear the place to bits. But yeah, I mean, if he does reach that 400, and Sujan Planet said that he might reach that, and that's his current sort of running kind of course, then obviously that would be a ridiculously unassailable total. Favorite Salah memory? Do you have any? I mean, there are just so many. In fact, it's almost a testament to the man that there are so many goals and so many weeks where he's scored and he's been your captain that they all sort of blur into one, don't they?
They do a bit, and a lot of the time, unfortunately, because he's so highly owned pretty much every single season, you can't really celebrate many of them that much. One week that stands out, I'll do one positive, one negative. The negative actually is the week that he had the double of, was it Norwich and Leeds, and he just went completely gangbusters and really ruined my rank because I didn't triple captain him that week and I wildcarded. So that's the negative. For a lot of people, it will be the positive. The week that stands out positively for me might be a bit random, but it was his performance against Man City. Do you remember where he got the goal of the season award for that wiggling run in and out of the defense? Yeah. I think it was in a 2-2 draw or something like that. So not a particularly standout performance necessarily for Liverpool or like his biggest ever score. But the reason I remember it is because it was a phenomenal goal for one, but also I was hanging out with the Playmaker crew. Shout out to them back in the day. Playmaker was a good, fun FPL app. And it was the first time I met up with them in person in Copenhagen. We all sat down at a bar, watched that game live, and saw that goal live on the big screen with them over a few beers. So that was a really nice moment to celebrate with a few other like-minded FPL friends, but probably not the biggest score that I can remember Salah getting.
I mean, if you've listened to this pod since the very beginning, you will know that the first season of Who Got the Assist, I was being quite like really gambly because that's how I played a long time in the past, and I sold Salah just before he played Bournemouth away, and he's got a hat trick that week, and everyone sort of owned him. I can't remember what the reasoning was because as we were talking about kind of that being 2017, but that killed my season. Honestly, that's destroyed my season. There's nothing, and I made all the mistakes that you would normally make. So all the classic ones. I took me ages to buy him back in, so I didn't want to admit my mistake and so on and so forth. I didn't want to just reverse that, which I should have done immediately. And of course, experience now tells me that's exactly what I would do if I was in a situation. But yeah, my stubbornness coupled with kind of feeling shame at the stupidity of selling him while everyone else was enjoying their hat trick from the captain, just destroyed my season. And I think I kind of learned the valuable lesson. I say that, but I'm sure I've made the same mistake over and over again. I'm thinking of you buying Darwin Nunez and selling Ollie Watkins, also thinking about selling Saka. Anyway, I won't go on about that. My favourite Salah memory was actually when I was taking a break from podcasting and taking a break from Who Got the Assist, taking a break from Twitter, everything. That game week where it was Salah versus Mane, triple captain. Do you remember it? And Mane went off in the first 20 minutes, didn't he, injured? And I was in I was in Australia, and I had triple captain Salah, reasoning that everyone's going on Mane. I've got nothing to lose. I'm not really I'm not podding or anything. Without that exposure, I can kind of be a bit punty. I remember kind of waking up and seeing the aftermath of the first game. Salah, I think he scored a pen, at least one pen, and got an assist, I think it was. And I was just like cock a hoop, really, because I was meant to not really be following FPL and being fully checked out and committed to traveling. But even I could quite fist pumped myself before, and my partner did spot me and was like, "What the f are you doing?" And I was like, "Salah did it." Yeah, I promise you I wouldn't be looking at this. But yeah, that's one of those. Probably the moment that stays with me the most. But yeah, I mean, hopefully we do get another year or two of Salah. But yeah, I'm just what a legend, basically. I don't know what else we can possibly say. It's been a privilege to be around while he's been around, and hopefully it continue for at least one more year. I think. Hopefully he doesn't kind of wither on the vine while he's while he's still in front of our eyes, like Kevin De Bruyne or something like that. No one wants to see that, do they?
No, and honestly, in the shape he's in, I can see another 2-3 seasons of him being about this good. So I hope he stays in the Premier League. I hope we have a bit of a decision to make next year based on some interesting pricing with him. If he was 14, 15 million, then it might make things a little bit more interesting. But yeah, for the sake of FPL, we all kind of hope he's still in the league, because it wouldn't be FPL without him at the moment, although there would be a lot more variation for some of our midfields and where we might be putting captaincy each week. So, maybe there's still green shoots even after he does eventually go. But yeah, for the meantime, absolute respect to him. He's been phenomenal player.
Yeah, I mean, what price next year? I mean, you're looking at him getting to 15, and if Haaland is kind of, just continues at his current rate for the rest of this year, you're looking at him being kind of 12.5. So it might be quite interesting that you end up with kind of the opposite gambit going on. People saying, "Oh, Salah's too expensive. I don't want that. I'm going to just he's getting old, blah blah blah." I think that could be really interesting as well, because they can't do anything except to shove him up to 15 next year. I cannot see them doing anything but that, despite the fact he would be getting older, etc., etc. So that'd be fascinating. It really will. But anyway, that's a discussion for 2020. Where are we now? 2026, 2025, 26? Yeah, we're not there yet. Right, okay. So this week is going to be just a preview of the blank, I think. And I know that's kind of quite another thing. We normally do deep dive, all that sort of thing. But right now, as you kind of rightly said to me earlier on, Sam, everyone's so laser focused on what's in front for obvious reasons. I think we're going to just have to do it. We will be doing kind of, obviously, as I said, next week, a deep dive into analytics. So, normal deeper stuff will come back into our zeitgeist next week, but this week it is the Gameweek preview. It's the knee-jerk best transfers, bold claims, and best captains, but with a bit of a twist. The knee-jerk this week is some free hit drafts, and I think it's something that we're going to just be discussing. Hopefully, it will be quite entertaining. It's obviously not for everybody. We know that most engaged managers are in fact looking to run through FPL Gameweek 29. We both are. But our hope is that we use this as a way to springboard into a discussion on key assets for the game week ahead, even if we're just using transfers. And there's a few kind of bits and pieces we'll go into them. But before we reveal those, Sam, any sort of general sort of free hit advice or anything like that? I know that we're going to rehash this again at some point, but let's do it now, and then we can refer back to it in the future and just say, hey, we spoke about this in Game Week 29, just to kind of say what we said then. Yeah, that sort of thing. Saves us time in future.
Yeah, I suppose with any free hit, it's all about risk appetite, but because the free hit this season is likely to be used in a blank, there might be a few examples out there of a double game week free hit that you could attack it with. But if you're already committed, then I suppose in a way you're potentially using it defensively, but I wouldn't back away or shy away from making a couple of bold calls on it. You're only owning these players for one game week, and some of these fixtures this week are there to be attacked. So just because a player is highly owned amongst those of us not free hitting, that might be an opportunity for you. So don't shy away from those opportunities. Have a healthy balance, I suppose, between those that you believe are just genuinely good options, even if they are highly owned and likely to score the points. But yeah, don't be afraid to maybe go against a popular pick. And I guess the thing you have to be careful of is picking a player just because they're highly owned, not because you think that they're actually going to score points this week. There's a couple of good examples we'll come on to, and I don't think we've included either of them in our free hit drafts. But yeah, I think the fixtures are there to be attacked this week, and there's definitely some fun to be had. So yeah, don't shy away from looking past the highly owned players just to cover you off defensively.
Yeah, I reach for the old sword versus shield thing on this one a little bit, and I think that I've done all types of free hits. I've done the all-out differential ones, which has fallen flat on this arse a couple of times. I've done the just pick basically what everyone else is picking ones, which again have been. I've got a green arrow out of it because you're fairly likely to. Back in the days of yore when the blanks, and I think maybe Game Week 34 would look like this. Back in the days of yore, when we used to have 4 or 5 fixtures, and I was using the free hit in that. That was kind of just following that sort of general sort of template rule. I got a decentish green hit and green arrow, and I suppose kind of the balance of something like maybe 7 or 8 of your players being kind of quite consistent, steady, maybe not players you'd have in your team already. So to kind of already name a name, Jared Bowen, for example, would be a player that maybe you think of including for your free hit on this time round, or Bruno Fernandes, a player you don't own. Jared Bowen, I think, is actually under 10% owned, so around 20% EO at the moment. So one of those. But in terms of the proper sort of crazy out there players, like, limit it to one or two. I mean, last year I think it was Jota who I kind of threw in on my free hit, and then he came over 12 pointer, and that was kind of a huge differential for me. And in some ways, those points probably contributed to me getting to the top 100k at the end of the year. So just don't get too carried away. Basically, the game week is there to be attacked. I think you're right in saying that, Sam. It's just kind of keeping that balance between balls to the wall and making sure that your picks are kind of still rooted in a modicum of sense, which will kind of come on to, especially when there's a few kind of individuals who are kind of floating around I've seen already in the zeitgeist and discussed last night as well, that maybe perhaps we need to kind of just slow down a bit, take a breath, and think, would I actually be looking at this guy? Yeah, otherwise. And just shout out as well, there's a very good video on FPL Pricey, Sam's channel, which I watched at lunchtime, which also goes through a free hit draft and explains the reasoning in a really, really nice way. So that's definitely worth watching as well. If you are on free hit, you want to go deeper on it, because we're going to, as we said at the beginning, use that as a bit of use the free hit as a bit of a springboard into discussing the main assets rather than majoring on the free hit itself, because we're trying to cater for everybody here as far as we possibly can. So let's look at the free hit drafts that we've put together. I think we just kind of read them out and kind of discuss them. Just to note, obviously this is really easy for us to do because we're not on free hit. So they are teams that maybe we wouldn't 100% be going with if we were on free hit. I'm sure they kind of would be in a different sort of mental state and we'd be thinking about it so much more. We've kind of put it together in Sam's case for his video, in my case for just kind of general interest, just to kind of show what a free hit may look like if you were being, in my case, a little bit more ballsy, but still hopefully, again, it's just a segue into talking about all of those sort of deeper bits and pieces that we'll discuss. Both from an FPL team. They're both up on the YouTube if you're watching, but if you're listening, we'll go through kind of the 11. In terms of the bench as well, we'll kind of call out if there's anyone we particularly kind of have a 50-50. I know you've got like a dead heat between two players, Sam. So yeah, I'm in a 3-4-3 in my one. I've thrown Sells in goal, him and Neko for a double Forest defence. Gvardiol and Ait Nori make up the back line. I think that's kind of fairly standard, I think, to have a one Forest, one Man City, and one and Ait Nori basically as your sole wolf. Cliver in midfield, no surprises there. Bowen, I've just mentioned. Bruno Fernandes, and I'd have Garnacho actually. Discuss him in a little bit, but I think he could be a really interesting one this week. And up front, no surprises that Haaland has the armband. Chris Wood's in the team. And I've thrown Evan Nilsson in there actually. I've got Gabriel sat on the bench. I've got Kirko sat on the bench. I've just whatever midfielder. I put Maddison in there, but whatever midfielder. It could have been Bumo, to be honest, and maybe I could have thought about that a bit more. And then I've got Edison as the backup keeper, just because you might as well showboat, because this week, if you're free hitting, you've got no money worries whatsoever, unless you are putting in Cole Palmer. So yeah, that's my free hit, and yours is similar coverage, and there's obviously, I think, maybe adhering to what I just said in terms of having a decent sort of balance. We've got quite a few of the same kind of steady Eddie players, but in terms of kind of your famous edge pieces, Sam, you do have a few sort of different selections, don't you?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to note is, without us even looking at each other's drafts, we've ended up on something relatively similar with a fair few number of consistent picks, which might indicate that the free hit is relatively simple to pick from this week. So not a bad week to free hit for if you're looking at it. My differences are I've gone with double Wolves defense rather than double Forest. So I've gone Jose Sarr in goal rather than Sells. The reason that I've gone with that is because I've watched Southampton and we are absolutely awful in front of goal. The fact that we scored against Liverpool is nothing more than dumb luck, honestly, and quite a mistake from Liverpool's back line. And we are the lowest scorers in the league, lowest XG in the league, and Wolves haven't been too shabby defensively. What I've actually done with the Wolves defence, because I do think it's there to be attacked, is I've put Jose Sarr in goal with Ait Nuri in my back line, but I've also put Johnston in as my reserve keeper, just in case something were to happen to Sarr, and then I've still got that Wolves defense coverage as a double up, and I'm not using another Wolves player anywhere else. So thought that's quite a nice little thing that no one else is going to have, just in case of emergency. Johnston could come off the bench there. I do still have Nottingham Forest coverage in defence in the form of Milenkovic rather than Williams. Ipswich are very poor from set pieces, and I fancy him to get his head on the end of something. Although I'm not as confident, I guess, in the clean sheet as I would be with Wolves. So I've only gone with the single Nottingham Forest defender there rather than doubling up, because Ipswich do have a little bit about them going forward. And I do have a bit of a feeling that Delap could get something, for instance. So I'm not as confident, but I think it would be maybe foolish on a free hit not to include at least one of them. So Milenkovic is my guy. Gavardio as well, much like you, Tom. I'm sure we'll come on to him in a bit. In midfield, I've gone with 5 rather than 4. Kluivert and Burmo does get a place, although I will agree to the idea that maybe he's one you might want to attack against. At the end of the day, for me, he's a 90-minute man on penalties, good data, so he stays for me. Bowen, much like you, same with Bruno Fernandes, who's arguably an outside captaincy shout, but rather than Garnacho, I've gone with Elanga, who I quite like the matchup against Ipswich. And then up top, I've got Haaland and Wood. So I've gone 3-5-2. But as you mentioned, it's a bit of a dead heat for me between starting Evan Nilsson, who is on my bench, or Elanga, who is in my starting lineup. So it's a pretty much 51-49 split between them at the moment. The reason I've gone with Elanga is because Evan Nilsson's working his way back up to full fitness and might get reduced minutes a little bit. Semenyo hasn't made it into either of our drafts, I think, because of the very slight inkling that there might be a bit of cramp or a hamstring injury potentially, but he's not a bad option. On my bench, I haven't used up the money that you have, because I'm fairly happy with my forward 8. But Evan Nilsson, Kirkes and Wan-Bissaka as that cheap 5th defender. 5.8 in the bank, so very easy to upgrade somewhere. Potentially a Foden, for instance, could be included over an Mbeumo as an alternative, which I was quite tempted to go with, but I've decided against it for now.
Yeah, Paul in the chat's just mentioned Gibbs White, and he was definitely a player that I probably should put in for Madison. I actually shouted him last night as one of my differentials of this week. I do really like Gibbs White. I think he so Forest. I think that we might as well start on this anyway, Sam. It's probably one of those things that Forest third in the league, blah blah blah, doing really really well this year. Little known fact is that they're sit from bottom for Team XG this year. Well, maybe not little known, but hey, we've highlighted several times that obviously they are relying a lot on Christopher Wood's ability to conjure goals at nothing this year. Gibbs White is actually second to Woods for goal involvement for the year gone by on the set pieces, and I think that he'd be like a good asset for this week as well. I probably would have put him with Madison actually if I kind of had longer to look at this than just my lunchtime, while I was also watching you, so it's kind of like a bit of a multitask. You
do have triple Forest already though.
Yeah, I think maybe I'd have kind of slightly rejigged it and maybe put another goalkeeper in or something like that. But I think that'd be the way around it if he wants to go there. And then maybe it would be for me a dead heat again between Evan Nilsson and Gibbs White, so similar to you, if I was to go that way. But yeah, I mean, in terms of just kind of overall, it was quite striking, isn't it, that we've got kind of basically the same coverage in defence. It's kind of a bit of a toss-up between a Neko and a Milenkovic. Like, there's no reason for me to have Neko in other than some potential sort of clean sheet you make a good point in terms of the Milenkovic attacking the attacking sort of upside, going for kind of similar players in the front line, except I've kind of gone for the punt of Garnacho, you've gone for the punt of Elanga, absolutely fine there, and the rest of it is absolutely identical, which I think in and of itself shows that yes, there are kind of fixtures to be attacked this week, but it's also reassuring, I think, to a lot of people who aren't on free hit, because I'm guessing that in a lot of ways a lot of these players are going to be covered, aren't they? Or at least you're going to be thinking, well, on what is going to be a toss-up. I mean, don't forget that like we're looking at everything. If you're looking at anything based on a one game week basis, the entire thing is just a toss-up. You're a slave to variance this week, and you might be looking at this and thinking, well, actually, my pick for this week, be it say a Marmouche versus an Evan Nilsson, or a Mikolenko versus or a Gabriel versus a Milenkovic. Like any of these players could be the one who does come through. It's kind of really sort of properly narrowed, focused in on 1 week. And Sam, I think there's, even though these free hits do look quite nice, and mine's a little bit more risky than yours, perhaps, I don't look at it and think, oh, I'm absolutely screwed here with 11 men that I'm probably going to have this week on a hit. Maybe unlike kind of previous years where it has sort of felt like, oh, if I really need the stars to align for me to get through this with a green or at least a grey arrow.
Yeah, agreed. And I think if you're on a free hit this week, you're obviously going to attack those fixtures as I suggested. But there are certain scenarios in which the fixtures that you are attacking just don't go the way that you predict. So maybe Brentford, Bournemouth doesn't have many goals in it. Maybe Ipswich and Southampton, as unlikely as it might seem, pull off something and make it a quite tough day at the office for Nottingham Forest and Wolves respectively. So it doesn't take a lot for the fixtures to kind of go against you, and therefore, because you're so heavily exposed to particular assets from particular teams, it only needs a couple of results to go against you to all of a sudden make the free hit not really that powerful. In the meantime, there will be some players that are going to have higher ownership amongst those of us who aren't free hitting. So the Gabriel and Arsenal defense generally. Palmer will still have some ownership overhanging. And then you've also got players like Fulham assets, for instance. So Robinson in the back line still will have some underlying effective ownership, maybe a Raul Jimenez up top. Beto perhaps hasn't made it into either of our free hit drafts, but could easily get something, or a Pickford as well, arguably could have been included on a free hit draft. We haven't, and I would suspect that's because we've both gone with Bowen and expect that clean sheet to be wiped. But if Pickford has a good day at the office, then he's relatively well owned at the moment, thanks to the overhang from game week 24 or 25. 24. And therefore, if he has a good day, Bowen might not. And again, that's something that could go against you. So I think if you're not on a free hit, it wouldn't be the craziest thing to come out with a green arrow and maybe bloody the nose of some free hitters. And that is obviously the risk that you take with any free hit. But in a blank where there are some highly owned players that you'll be going against, there is risk attached always.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a really good point. And I think that's really interesting to just think about, because I think we've done this very early on in the week. And I think it is fair to say that in weeks where you've got, I suppose, the popular move is the free hit, which I don't think is this week, you would see, especially if there were kind of more fixtures blanking, you would see a template start to form and solidify towards the end of the week. I think that we do have a lot of similarity already within this, but as you said, as you've kind of inferred a couple of times, and you've kind of pointed out with me not having Bumo, there are going to be key omissions however you spin it. And one way of looking at it is kind of, as you were kind of starting to go, the road you're starting to go down, which is like, okay, what are the kind of the effective ownership pitfalls that I'm missing out on? And one would be Pickford. There's no Gabriel in either of our drafts, and there's no Palmer in either of our drafts as well. I've already sold Palmer, spoiler, and I think that definitely a lot of people will be doing that if you are running through, because he's probably a very good way of getting to the big robot. So I think, just kind of pivoting onwards from this week in terms of the best transfers, we're going to be just kind of having a look at a collection of picks for the upcoming blank. So on if you're watching on YouTube, don't worry if you're not, we'll talk through the majority of these, but it's just a bit of a reference point. The usual, now we've looked at this for the last 3 weeks in some way, shape or form. Hey, you know what? It's one of those periods of FPL, a table which just shows players who are kind of salient blank game with 29 assets, their price, the fixture they've got, whether on penalties, the non-pen XGI in terms of involvement, and their underlying, and whether they've under or overperformed over the last 6 game weeks on screen. And I just mentioned that neither of us have Palmer, Sam, and he is the biggest underperformer. It comes no surprise to anybody. This excluding the penalties over the last 6 game weeks, a massive minus 3.79 in terms of, I know, and it was absolutely shocking that the last time he returned was actually in game week 21. Which kind of takes us back to that midweek in January, the 14th of January. Got in the So the last time he scored, last time he got a return was that was last time he scored. Yeah, the last time we got a return was the 1st of February against West Ham. He got an assist in that game. But yeah, a player who's obviously completely off the boil, but probably one of the biggest kind of the exemplar, I guess, of what you were saying about taking a player on is the fact that free hitters, I think, will be probably almost definitely overlooking Palmer. And it seems to me, at least right now, that the movement in the community does seem to be as well to go against Palmer this week, remove Palmer this week. Second highest sold at the moment behind Hall, over 200,000 sales for Palmer. Not quite. Kind of Haaland isn't quite kind of the beneficiary of that. That's Bruno Fernandes with over 220,000 transfers in. But I know, Sam, the people I've been at least speaking to, or at least kind of the teams that I've seen, Dan said in the chat as well, who's thinking of doing kind of what I'm thinking of doing. Most people I've spoken to do seem to be kind of doing Palmer to X to basically facilitate Isaac or another. You've got Gakpo or something still to Haaland. That does seem to be the way. So maybe the biggest risk this week, and also the biggest underperformer, does look to be kind of selling Palmer or going against Palmer, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so, and that will be quite welcome news for any of you on a free hit, I suppose, because normally he would be the one that you'd be worried about, given that his data is still very good, and given the fixtures well away at Arsenal, you're not expecting him to return well, so you would take him on. And if he still had 80-90% effective ownership, then that's a big gamble, and it doesn't take a lot for a player of his quality to actually just kind of break through the dam and start getting returns again, given the data is still good. So it will be comforting to know that effective ownership will drop, and I would imagine it goes down to something like 40-50% this week, making it much less painful, even if he were to wipe out that Arsenal clean sheet and do a bit of damage to any of us going against him. I am extremely likely to sell him. I think in every single one of my routes, I'm getting rid of him this game week. I know you already have, and I know a lot of other managers are as well. So whether or not you're on a free hit, I think the time has come to use him as a make weight to get to Erling Haaland, or of course Bruno Fernandes, or indeed both potentially in some cases. And I think, like I was saying at the start of this section, the free hit is there to be attacked, and some players you are going to have to take on. You can't own them all, given the fixture and given the fact that there is something going on. He's not quite himself at the moment. He's slashing at chances a little bit. I do think it is an opportunity to go against a relatively highly owned player, although that is falling a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. And it's something that we've kind of signposted for a while. And James on Planet made this point as well. I was just listening to him on the way home, that after this point, after this game we just gone, your captaincy is pretty much covered by Salah, Isaac, and Haaland for the rest of the year. Not to say that Palmer's obviously not a great asset potentially, and all of the kind of usual things that when we wax lyrical about Cole Palmer, it's obviously more than justified the price hike this year with his 181 points. Take Salah out of the equation, he'd be the top FPL point scorer. So I think that's probably not something that we need to be arguing about. But a lot of those points were scored before January. A lot of those points were scored in 2024. So, I mean, he's also had an amazing time this year, but right now it seems like kind of the real politique of the situation, as it were, does seem to be that, you can probably make your peace with moving Palmer on. And I suppose, Sam, that kind of nicely leads us to what you're doing with that, which is almost definitely to get to Haaland for a lot of people this week. I know a lot of people aren't, and a lot of people are kind of favouring move elsewhere. I know that if you're kind of a more of an analytics aficionado, that you'll be probably looking to buy Bruno Fernandes, because obviously FPL Review is hell bent on you owning Bruno Fernandes all day, every day for the rest of time. I suspect if you ask Review, is Salah or Bruno Fernandes a better FPL asset? You would say Bruno Fernandes. But I think that a lot of people are kind of looking at buying in Haaland, maybe for this week, but principally for Leicester at home in game week 30. So look at those two and think, hey, you know what? For those two games, I think I'm going to wildcard potentially in 31, almost definitely in my case. I haven't sold Isaac. We'll come on to that kind of decision in a minute. But it does kind of seem like, although Brighton is an okay game, Sam, for the 2-game stretch, 2 home games, the big robot who is overperforming his non-pen XGI, as it should be said, with the 5 goals with 2.86. Nothing to be shocked by, really. There is there, and yeah, it just feels like it might be time now where the pendulum swings more towards the big man.
Yeah, and I think given that this week the captaincy is pretty open, I mean, you could look at Chris Wood, but and Bruno Fernandes, but I think Haaland's probably going to edge it for any of us who can get to him. It does make sense to use Palmer as that mate weight to get to him as soon as possible, given the next 2 fixtures. If you're on a free hit, Brighton at home is fine, but the juicy one is Leicester at home in game week 30, and arguably a captaincy option over or against Mo Salah, who has Everton that week. So yeah, for me, he's almost certainly coming in. I think he's in 3 of my 4 preferred routes, and I'm very happy to own him for now. Is he good value for money? Probably not. But given that one of the 2 other premiums in the game is off the boil at the moment and not going to be an option in game week 29 for a lot of us, then it makes sense to actually use that money elsewhere, especially because there are a lot of other relatively cheap assets at 6 to 5 million that you can move Palmer onto and feel pretty confident about it for game week 29 and indeed game week 30 as well to some extent. Bournemouth, Nottingham Forest doing us a lot of favours there with good options that you can get fairly cheap and have good enough fixtures for the next 2 that as a combination you can get on board with it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. It just feels like kind of one of those things that's like pragmatically makes a lot of sense. And as you say, we'll talk about them just a bit, because obviously we've got to talk about Bruno first, but we'll get onto them just a bit. There are loads of options nearish the basement. We spoke about Gibbs White, and you mentioned you got Elanga in your free hit draft already, that kind of help facilitate the move from Palmer basically to Haaland. But one way if you are stacked with money, or in your case, Sam, you're stacked with relatively stacked at least with free transfers, so you're able to kind of make it all work, it would be to move to Bruno, and maybe moving a Trent on to a Kirkes or an 8 Nora or something like that, which might give you enough to get from Isaac to Haaland. Let's take Bruno first and then move on to selling Isaac after that. Bruno is one of those players that I'm going to be worried about this week, and I do kind of, I know it's a bit kind of irrelevant actually, and it's illogical, but I don't like the fact that their game is last and also after the Carabao Cup final, Sam, because you've got that kind of bit of hope which kind of permeates the rest of the week. And as you said, he's a bit of an outside captain shout, isn't he? United in complete disarray. I don't mind Garnacho shout, as I said earlier on. He would be like one of those sort of like punty differentials that I would be seriously considering if I could have reached him. Although I don't know, maybe I'd have preferred a couple of others over him. But I mean, Bruno this week is probably the big miss for me, and I think that he's going to be the stronghold for free hitters, and also those like yourself who I think are one of your routes, maybe 2, that you're able to get there and bring him in.
Yeah, there's one route that I do quite like that gets me to Bruno. Actually, sorry, 2, but one of them would involve no Haaland. I'm unlikely to take that option, but I could go for Haaland from Isaac, Palmer to Bruno, but then Trent would need downgrading for a hit as well, which I'm open to taking, but I'd have to downgrade that position all the way to 4.8 or below. And it would also make things very tight with my preferred defensive 3 in game week 30. So a bit of forward planning was required, and my defense in game week 30 doesn't look too hot right now. I think it would involve playing Robinson away at Arsenal, for instance. So maybe I just make peace with that, but I'd prefer to use a free transfer next week to get to Munoz, which I'll need a little bit in the bank for. So I probably would need to downgrade Trent pretty heftily down to someone like a Williams for a hit to make that feasible. Means that I'm going without Trent or Gvardiol for the next 2, which I don't love, But it does give me Bruno against Leicester and then also against Nottingham Forest, which I don't mind as a combination. And I mean, I would fall short of being as much of an advocate as FPL Review is, but I am a fan of Bruno Fernandes. I've talked about him plenty this season.
Despite all he's done to you, Sam.
Well, yeah, but like
starting the season with him and
yeah, but that's just timing, isn't it? He's still got the points this year. He always does. He always gets the returns, and when he returns, he usually gets the bonus as well because no one else in Man United is getting any goals or assists, so he usually gets all the bonus too. So look, I mean, he's been in pretty good form recently as well. He's leading the side, and as much as you say Man United in disarray, they've been, I would say, a little bit improved as of late. That performance in the second half against Arsenal wasn't too terrible. So yeah, I don't mind going there at all. It's just quite difficult strategically to squeeze in Haaland and Bruno unless you're on a free hit.
Yeah, given how bad Leicester are as well, that feels like a bit of a slam dunk to me. In terms of buying, if you possibly can, they've actually, you'll be very, very happy to hear. They're actually very close to. They're very no, they're not. I thought they were a lot closer to Southampton than they are in terms of the XGA, but no, they're not. And yeah, still doing very badly. So yeah, definitely, I think that he is a bit of a slam dunk despite United. Yeah, maybe not being in disarray, and maybe there are green shoots there. And maybe all it took was putting a big tent over the stadium and making it look like Butlins. If you do look at the new stadium plan, do then Google what Butlins in Bognor Regis looks like and just compare the two. It's hilarious. Anyway, yes. So yeah, Bruno, I think that I'd be absolutely fine with that, and I do have a modicum of fear about him for the week ahead. And just to mention before we move on to some of the cheaper assets who could be kind of differentials this week. I'm selling Isaac to buy Haaland, and I know that you've been kind of an advocate of doing that for a while. For me, that took a couple of weeks, but then I think with the Cunha kind of injury last week, it kind of set me on the path because I knew I could then get Wood, I knew I could then get Haaland. Don't laugh, and then I think that kind of all kind of sort of made sense for me. Selling Isaac then I think basically nails me into wildcarding in 31. I mean, there's kind of no way no way around that. The main sort of thing that I don't think is too bad is that I think that the price overall is going to narrow a fair bit over the next week or so.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to probably make it slightly more palatable to be selling Isaac. And I don't think his ownership is fairly high still, which means there's going to have to be a lot of sales. But I mean, those sales are coming. And I think that by the time we get to the end of the week, he's on 160,000 sales at the moment. By the time we get to the end of the week, I think those sales are going to only multiply. So hopefully we'll see a couple of drops at least before we reach the deadline.
Yeah, agreed. And like you said, I've been talking about it for a few weeks now. I just always had that feeling that the closer we got to game week 29, the more that maybe not fear, but FOMO, I guess, creeps in with Haaland, because he is obviously a very explosive asset with a decent fixture. He'll be talked about quite a lot. He'll be on all the thumbnails. He'll be a captaincy shout for a lot of people. And a lot of people have Isaac with no fixture, and I think that price starts to come down, a couple of price drops, and all of a sudden people are like, oh, I'm only losing 0.2, 0.3 if I get rid of him. That's not too bad to get back to. And it means that I gain my favourite captaincy shout for a lot of people, and then also have him against Leicester as well. So yeah, for me, it's made sense for a little while. I had a route mapped out for Haaland from Isaac for a while, and I intend on going through with that. And I think I lose 0.3 as it stands on Isaac, but I expect by the time I actually go to buy him back on wildcard for 31, it will hopefully be 0.2, possibly even 0.1 more than I sold him for. So yeah, hopefully not too painful, especially if I'm holding on to Salah, and if I intend on keeping Salah through a wildcard, that's where I've got a big chunk of the value. So I was kind of on board with getting rid of one of those two, and Isaac seems like the easier one to get rid of. And a bit like you, because Cunha's out, it opened up that route a little bit now to get Wood a different way and have Haaland as well. So yeah, I think it's a move that to me makes sense, and over the next two, I expect it or hope for it to pay off.
Yeah, definitely. I've given no thought whatsoever to selling Salah. I assume that's the same for you. One word answer.
Yeah, no, for now, absolutely not for
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
I'm never going to rule it out completely on a wild card because I haven't looked into it properly yet and haven't seen how budgets will be spread. But I'm holding on to him now because I intend not to get rid of him on a wild card if at all possible. So yeah, fingers crossed I won't have to, but I'll come up with that decision later on down the line, and I'm sure Simon's got some
Yeah.
views on that as well that we'll talk to him about.
Yeah, no, that'd be really good next week. That's for sure. I think it's one of the kind of the key things we're going to ask him about. So yeah, we'll dig into that next week. Cool. All right. So I think let's move on to differentials a little bit. I think that there are a few players here that we're not going to cover necessarily. So we've mentioned Boomer already, Bowen, Woods. There's a bit of chat in the chat about Cliver. If you don't own him, I think that he's just one to get in, no brainer. The Brentford games looking goals friendly, and then you've got Ipswich in 30. Assuming you're going to wildcard sometime soon, but if not, I mean, Bournemouth do you a decent favour up until game week 32, 33, and he's just so highly owned. Like this week, I think he's just a bit one of the standout midfielders other than Bruno. So I'd be buying him. And Marmoush, just one of those characters. I've discussed him already on this pod. That if you can get there, and he's kind of an easy way in, maybe worth picking up. But very ex-lively. I don't think Foden did himself any favours against Forest, so I think Marmoush will be back in the team. And again, a bit of another one who's kind of potentially a bit short term, but him for the Brighton game, and then the Leicester game probably is no bad thing whatsoever. In terms of Palmery replacement, so starting with midfield in terms of the puntier areas, and there are a few players who are kind of bipping, to use a technical term, on the radar. And I think it depends obviously so much on what you've got. If you're in the upper echelons of money floating around, yeah, okay, if you can get Cliver, do. There's Gibbs White, who I mentioned earlier on, who's okay. You've got the I'll come back to why I called them this later, but the ghost wingers for Forest in Elanga and Hudson-Odoi. And then you're on to Savino or Savio, as he's known in the game at City, Bellegarde at Wolves, who's probably the pick of the bad bunch, Ranieri and Garnacho, who I mentioned earlier on, Sam. So quite a few players sort of in this mix. There are a few others obviously I haven't mentioned, like Jack Harrison and stuff. I mean, if you really want to go there, be my guest. I'm not going to be doing that or giving them too much mention on this pod. But I mean, there's a whole kind of cast of characters there, Sam, and they're all sort of obviously massively dictated by how much money you've got. But yeah, I mean, you had a Langer to refer back to your free hit draft.
Yeah.
Was that just because Ipswich Leaf Davis?
Yeah, Elanga to me makes most sense. I think of all of those players sub 6 million, he's probably my favourite at the moment. Not bad underlying attacking data, and again, Ipswich, not a bad shout. And then there's also the carrot of Man United the week after. If you're not on a free hit, you can have him against his old team. And I think given the way certain things have panned out this season, you would not be surprised whatsoever to see him haul against them. So I quite like the narrative factor for Elanga. I'm going to be really unfair though, because you told me to have a look at this graph earlier whilst I was quite busy at work, and I didn't think to add extra like little cheeky differentials in here, but I'll name 3 that aren't on here that if you're really feeling it, I think you might be able to steal a march. So Foden isn't on here, which I missed completely. That's my bad. I do agree with you that he didn't cover himself in glory in the most recent match, but he's got a great history against Brighton. I think he got a hat-trick not too long ago against them as well. And Pep, I think memory serves me right. He used to do this with Mahrez a lot, where he has his favourites for specific matches and specific matchups. And I feel like he uses Foden in a specific role next to Haaland against Brighton quite regularly. So I think he will play. And I like the upside there. And until recently, if I was free hitting, he would have been on my free hit draft. Yeah, Paul Jones in the chat has rightly said, feels like a week where Foden gets a hat-trick. I completely agree. Then 2 others that until recently I hadn't even considered. Tavernier as well, very low owned player, is now back and starting and has not quite displaced Dango, but I think as a 3 in behind Evan Nilsson is probably preferred. Again, will be extremely differential. And then finally, my favorite from earlier on this season, still coming up with great underlying data of over 0.5 XGI per 90, is Yankuba Minte. Yes, it's against Man City, but I kind of fancy Brighton to get in behind that City side a little bit. And Gvardiol is on both of our free hit drafts, but would I be surprised if Brighton get in behind and Minte springs that trap? Not at all. So yeah, that might be another differential to throw in the mix as a very interesting little edge piece that you can have on a free hit draft. Or if you want to challenge it for a couple of weeks, then feel free to bring in as a transfer.
No, I really like Minte, actually. That's a good shout. I think it's just one of those where I looked at him playing City and Villa next to and just thought, just because there's also, I think he's starting at the moment. You never know with Brighton. He's got so many players who could possibly play, and that's the only thing. But yeah, he does seem to be in the team at the moment, and yeah, one of those players you really liked at the start of the season. So really fair shout. In kind of, I really wanted, if I was going to go for one in kind of the sub Bowen sort of area, it was very, if I was able to get a Savinho or a Gibbs White, I think I'd be really thinking about one of those two. Savinho obviously has the kind of less X-mins, but has been kind of ticking on quite nicely. He and Haaland seem to have a decent sort of understanding, unlike his and Doku's. And Gibbs White, as I said earlier on, does seem to have that sort of just be this kind of creative fulcrum for Forest, even though it's not the most creative team you ever seen in your life. But I wasn't able to do that. Don't have any space for a Bournemouth player because I've still got Dango who'd be sitting around for me for the next couple of weeks. So I was really kind of corralled into thinking, right, okay, I've got to go cheap. And literally it came down to Hudson-Odoi, Elanga and Bellegarde, I suppose. I really like Manetzi. He was the one that I was like kind of half scouting at FPL Meets, but he went off injured at half time, so I couldn't buy him. And then Bellegarde was one who came in at Wolves. I spoke to Dan and FPL Black Wolf about kind of Wolves and midfielders. He was saying, yeah, Bellegarde's probably the one if you want to go for it. Just try to spike some variants, but we've got so many players who could possibly play. But it looks like Bellegarde will play. Had a decent assist as well from Manetzi. So I kind of just thought, you know what, right, you've got for Forest, you've got Ipswich next, and then you've got Man United at home in game week 30. It was between Hudson-Odoi and Elanga, and it was very much vibes. Yeah, the data probably does favour Elanga. He's definitely got the goal involvement kind of side going on. Hudson-Odoi is very much kind of just basically taking shots, and that's all Hudson-Odoi is. But on a 2-week basis, I kind of thought, you know what, right? He scored 2 goals in 3 games. One of those players, it could be just one of those things is confidence, but I mean, it's really who you vibe with this week. If you're looking at a player of that price, Waneri was kind of the one that I was really thinking all along. Yeah, I'd throw him in, but him coming off pre-60 for Martinelli against Man United has thoroughly put me off, unfortunately, in Ranieri. Obviously, fine for the price, but this week where I need bodies, it was essentially between Hudson-Odoi and Elanga, and I was vibing with Hudson-Odoi just that bit more. So he's ended up in my team. I did have, I couldn't tell that there was this data. There was also FPL Review did put them kind of both at basically a coin flip in terms of the expected points. I looked at kind of the stats bomb data for like finishing skill effectively, and Hudson-Odoi came out slightly on top of Elanga. But overall, it's just one of those players I quite like. Hudson-Odoi. He's quite direct. The underlying data isn't there for him. It's not really there for Elanga at all, actually, this season, if you look through it. And it just became a bit of a coin flip, and who I kind of felt was best. And I kind of just felt where I vibe with Hudson-Odoi, so that's where I've gone. But yeah, I mean, I think that kind of that, and outside of your Bowens, your Boomos, that's the sort of in this week it's all going to hinge on, isn't it? Kind of where your vibes sort of lie. And that's really not a WGTA point, but it's just one of those things that if you're looking at it on a 1-week basis, does seem to kind of come to the fore for a decision like this.
Yeah, it's simple, really. The shorter the sample size, the more variance plays a factor. If you're looking across 3 or 4 seasons worth of data there and you need a pick to stay the course for that amount of time, then you can much more reliably bet on the data and it will usually pay off for you. But in a 1 game week run, then you can bring in vibes, you can bring in gut feeling a little bit more because there's more variance that you can spike. So for instance, if I had the spare money, I actually quite like Gibbs White. I don't know why. I can't really give a logical reason. I just think he's sort of that guy, and I like him as a player, and I kind of fancy him over Hudson-Odoi or Elanga, but that's just more of a personal, anecdotal thing for a couple of game weeks. The same goes for like a Minte or a Foden. I've just got a bit of a gut feeling about them. I can't really get to Foden. So yeah, if it is a free hit, then you can truly go after that gut feeling with 1 or 2 of them, because the variance is much more sharp in a 1 game week sample. If you're looking at a transfer for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or beyond, then obviously you need to maybe look more closely at the data and look at whether they're locks for that starting lineup for the next few game weeks. 2 weeks for me, and probably for you, you can have a bit of fun, but you need to be relatively secure that they're going to start both of the games.
Yeah, I don't think we should we don't need to labour this point anymore, really. And in terms of everything this week, outside of the picks that I think Sam and I have both mentioned, who are a bit more kind of steady Eddie quality players that you can trust, exemplified by likes of Bowen and Bruno. The rest of it does really feel like, where's your kind of, in terms of the edge pieces specifically, most of the time you would be looking at kind of the more steady players, but in terms of the edge pieces, it really is kind of where your kind of instinct goes, where's your gut go. If you love a Bellegarde and you want to spike some variance this week, especially on a free hit, fine, grab him for Southampton. But other than that, just kind of it's one of those that doesn't really kind of get. The longitudinal data doesn't really help you too much here, and it really is about stuff like the eye test and kind of subjective factors which kind of inform your choices. So yeah, I think overall it's been an interesting week, that's for sure. I think a lot of it is going to hinge on potentially Haaland versus Wood. We'll talk about the captaincy in just a moment, but there are lots of options on the table regarding depending on what you're going to do, and hopefully we've helped you a little bit in terms of what you're going to look at, in terms of the decisions you're going to make. And if you are wildcarding in 31, just remember that barring any injuries, I know that I've seen that Trent's has gone off with some sort of knee thing, but barring any injuries, so we don't know what that is, this might be your because most teams end up in game week 30 looking pretty good. This might actually be your pre-wildcard punt, so just bear that in mind, that you can, if you really want to, just go with a bit more of a vibey pit this time. It's certainly what I've done. All right, let's move on to the bold claims before we do best captains. Just get that in, just to kind of, I suppose, wallow in our shame, because our hit rate is going down even more, Sam, down to 70.8% now. All no's again last week. We're not even hitting the post. We're kind of hitting the corner flag with these.
Yeah, again, I've said every week they're bold for a reason, Tom. 17.8% hit rate is bold, I would say. It's a bold hit rate. Wood double-digit haul for me did not pay off. Obviously, I bought him in, so I was more in hope than expectation, but no dice for me.
Yeah, and Wolves take no more than 5 shots versus Everton. It was just me assuming that without Cunha, they'd be in disarray. I think they got kind of 11 or 12 in the end. So, yeah, didn't quite work out for me either. This week, I'm going with Palmer to finally make good on his underlying data against the best defence of the lot against Arsenal, getting 10 plus points. So he'll need a couple of attacking returns in this one to get that. Obviously, given what we've seen recently, it looks unlikely and therefore bold. But considering we're all selling him, it would be the week that he does finally turn it around. Oh, the old happiness hedge.
Exactly.
I don't know what the odds would be. I assume they'd be kind of favouring him, if anybody, at Chelsea, week on week on week. But I think I'm going to allow it just because it's happiness hedge and because of the kind of the contextual factors of what's happened with Palmer. For me, Southampton to beat Wolves. Full stop.
It ain't happening.
If Derby, you've got, this is surely the last game on the. In terms of the Romanian fixture list that you'll be looking at, you being Southampton, thinking, yeah, we could probably win this. I know it's Leicester, and I think you've got Leicester left, haven't you, or something like that. And but the rest of it, this must be the one game where you think, okay, could get a win out of it. And Wolves are, I mean, yeah, I think Pereira was full of praise for them. They did look all right on Match of the Day, and they did look all right when I was watching them. But surely, if this is going to be the 1 week, it is a bold claim, but this feels like the week where Southampton do get the monkey off their backs in terms of beating out the Derby. Get not being able to beat the Derby unwanted records. That's my feeling anyway. But I'm sure you hope I'm right. I hope I'm right, because hopefully we get a point on the board.
Yeah, it's not happening. It's not happening.
Right, let's move on swiftly.
Best captain. So Haaland, Woods, possibly Fernandes, maybe even Clivert as well. Where are you thinking at the moment, Tom?
Well, I think that I was saying yesterday on the Formers Temporary pod that, like, if you own Haaland, you captain him, and I think that Wood is going to actually be a bit of a test case for Game Week 30, because Game Week 30, what you're going to see is owning, if you own Haaland and Salah, that Salah's going to be the runaway effective ownership captain, but you're going to want the captain Haaland for Leicester. This week, it's maybe not quite the same, because Woods got a better fixture on paper, and Brighton are a much better team than Ipswich. Whereas next week, I suppose you can do the Everton thing versus Haaland with Leicester. But it's a bit of a test case, just because I think it'd be interesting to see what I think Woods can do the chip leader, effective ownership wise. So I think Haaland's going to be a good sort of challenger pick. And I think kind of in terms of what he can do, we've already spoken about the fact that he's overperforming his underlying data, which is no surprise when it comes to Haaland. But I just think that I think that he'd be he's kind of like your the captain number 2, I suppose, in terms of the effective ownership stakes. And I think that in terms of players who can really go off, I know Chris Wood has gone off this year, but in terms of players who could really go off, in terms of players who do feel like they're a decent bet, Haaland probably does fit the bill for me, at least. I'm well aware he's only got kind of one double-digit return, done one double-digit haul in the last sort of 6 or 7 game weeks. So it's one of those where you're kind of hoping that the Brighton, who lost 7-0 against Nottingham Forest not very long ago, show up that week. But my feeling is Haaland, but there are loads of other options. Like Clivert, as just mentioned by Ian in the chat. You mentioned Bruno Fernandes as well. All players who I would feasibly consider. Like, I did have a plan, one route before I kind of inadvertently was committed to this one through Cunha being injured, where this week I'd be taking it on with Bruno Fernandes as the captain, and I'd have been fine with that. So yeah, max variance, as you sort of noticed earlier on, but it feels like kind of going with Haaland does, if things hadn't happened how they have transpired with City this year, a home game for Haaland would be a game that none of us would be kind of basking eyelid at captaining a player in that, and we wouldn't be kind of thinking, I'm going to take him on. And that's something that maybe is in mind for me, even though, I'm mindful that contexts do change. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I echo those sentiments completely. There's not much more I can say on Haaland. I think looking back, not even in the too distant past, we would have even half expected 2 or 3 returns in this fixture. Now, because he hasn't really been the centre of our focus in a little while, and he hasn't had a double-digit return too often in the last few game weeks, then maybe we're maybe not appreciating what sort of player he can be if they are ticking that day. Brighton have been very good recently, so that's worth noting. And maybe there's an argument that City, because they've also not been at their best, that maybe the dynamic of this fixture, Haaland up against them, has changed a little bit, but I still like to back the player quality. We still know that he's got regular hat-tricks in his locker. We've got those sort of explosive returns at semi-regular intervals over the last few seasons with Haaland. With Wood, it does and can happen, but it's much more rare. It's more often that he gets 1 return a game, maybe 2 every very rarely now and then. But with Haaland, also with Bruno, I've got that feeling that you can get a couple of returns out of them a bit more regularly. That's anecdotal. I haven't checked on Bruno recently, but Haaland, especially with the home fixture against a defence that until recently had been a little bit shoddy, I still back him. I think he's the best option for me. And I do agree that Wood's ownership will be around about 100%. And because I'm chasing, I think Haaland's will be a bit lower. And I actually prefer him over Wood or Bruno anyway. I think it's about 60-40. So he's going to be lower effective ownership. I think higher potential upside. And then also the explosive element of Haaland's game as well is something that I want to back, considering I'm chasing.
Yeah, no, definitely. But I mean, it is open this week. It's kind of a bit of a split pin, I think. You'll probably see Wood, as you said, just about getting that over that 100%. I think he's a default captain if you can't get to Haaland or you don't want to get to Haaland. But other than that, if you do fancy a Kluivert, you do fancy a Bruno, I think that it's one of those where it's actually quite nice to have a break from the Salah hegemony.
Fun.
Yeah, exactly. And then next week, on game week 30, when that comes around, we can hide behind the sofa when the Merseyside derby's on and hope that Haaland does show up against Leicester. But yeah, this week I think I'm on the robot. I haven't actually bought him yet, but I'm sure I will. Cool. All right, and just to round off, team and plans for this week.
Well, my team looks absolutely awful at the moment, but I imagine a lot of us haven't made our transfers yet, and therefore the team doesn't look too great. I've got 10 players starting at the moment. Pickford in goal against West Ham, that's fine, happy enough with that. Backline looks pretty ropey. Home fixtures for a lot of them: Robinson at home to Spurs, Gabriel at home to Chelsea, and Greaves at home to Nottingham Forest. Not too happy about that one. And a decision will be made as to whether it's worth a -4, especially if Trent's injured as well, which might be news from tonight. I'll have to look into that. It might therefore be worth using a -4 to upgrade that final position and bench Greaves. In my midfield, I've got 4 starters: Kluivert, Palmer, Mbeumo, and Semenyo. Semenyo might be a slight doubt, but I think he'll probably pull through and be okay. I'll keep an eye on that. Palmer away at Arsenal will be my make weight to get to Haaland, from Isak, who is currently sat on my bench. João Pedro and Wood will both start. If you asked me a couple of weeks ago whether I was happy or planning to even own João Pedro in game week 29, I would have laughed. But considering the way things have gone, and FPL does change pretty quickly, I'm now delighted to have him in my team ahead of this week because he saved me from taking a -8 potentially this week. On my bench, Isak, Trent, who might be injured, and Hall, who definitely is injured. And I think, Palmer to probably Elanga, and Haaland in for Isak is the simple move. I'll have a look at Trent. If he is injured and he looks like he might be a doubt even for game week 30, then I might take an opportunity there, have a look at Gvardiol potentially, and possibly even someone more expensive than Elanga in midfield instead.
Yeah, no, fair play. João Pedro has gone from the turd who won't flush to a turd that now polishing frantically, hoping it leads some gold in there. No, fair enough. You've definitely got loads of options, and you've got the extra free transfer on me. If Trent is injured, I'm going to have to just kind of hold him for this week and then maybe deal with it next week because I've already got my 11. But yeah, the team's looking fine. Sorry, my daughter's just woken up. I'm just going to slowly turn off. I'm going to turn down the monitor.
No worries. We're right at the end anyway. We can rush through it.
Exactly. All looking good, I think. And for me, I've already made a transfer. I've boarded the Cho train. Because last night it was looking like when I went to bed, Palmer would. So when I went to bed, Palmer wasn't over 100% to drop. He didn't. I think he's going to drop tonight. And I wanted to bank 0.1 I had on him because I was just like, especially now I'm almost definitely selling Isak. Every 0.1 that I've got is going to be really important. So that kind of just felt like the thing to do. I've got Raya in goal, Gabriel, so the Arsenal double up against Chelsea. I've got to hope that Chelsea are still impotent. We'll see. I've got Kirkes, Mikalenko, which I'm kind of, he's been there since game week 6. Happy to own him for this last game, just because he obviously covers Mr. Pickford, who everybody seems to own at the moment. Midfield is going to be Hudson-Odoi, Kluivert, Bumo. I've got Dango. Obviously, I know he's almost definitely not going to start against Brentford, but he's just there as a body this week. 1 point off the bench, and hopefully he'll get something for me, and it can be all right. And up front, I'll end up having Haaland, Marmoush, and Wood. So the Man City double up for the next couple of weeks up front. I'm hoping you're wrong against about Foden, and I'm hoping that Marmoush does get the nod to play in that role. It might be. It just depends what happens there.
Mm.
And then Haaland will get the captaincy on the bench. Yeah, Salah, Trent, and Hall, just like you. So yeah, and let's see how it goes. It'll be -4 for me. I'm more than happy to do that. Then we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I will make a quick wrap up for the show because I know your daughter's in need. But
no, that's all right. My partner's going in. It's fine.
Okay, no worries. But yeah, I think we're relatively okay for game week 29. It would be nice to get a green arrow and start climbing up the ranks a little bit, and hopefully those Haaland captaincies are going to provide us with some much needed joy at the moment, because I think we could both use a big green arrow in the next couple of game weeks. In the meantime, though, thank you all so much for listening once again. We have been Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Blue Sky at WGTA or myself at FPL Pricey, on Twitter, X at WGTA_FPL or FPL Pricey on there, and Instagram or Threads at WGTA.FPL, FPL Pricey on there as well. If you did enjoy the pod, if you could leave a 5-star rating wherever you're listening, give us a follow on those aforementioned social channels, and of course, leaving a like and pressing subscribe on YouTube is also incredibly helpful. Thank you so much in advance.
Yep, thank you everybody. I hope just you think about the blank game week. I thought that this pod wouldn't be too long, but we seem to have managed to end up at our usual sort of 1 hour 20-ish somehow. Next week, as I mentioned, we'll be joined once more by friend of the pod, Sai, aka FPL Analytics, to discuss analytics and FPL for a bit of a WGTA deep dive, just because we've got a bit of a gap between game week 29 and game week 30. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.